Welcome to the Escape the Drift podcast. I am Dr. Jacob Egbert, and today the topic is the body is a record. Now, I want to start this off by saying something that's very cliche, or at least commonly said, and I'm sure you've heard this many times, and that is trauma is stored in the body. Now, this may be true on a very physiologic level, and that is what we're going to talk about today. Now, I got into this, or at least this topic became more forefront in my mind, and I've been mulling it over in the last 3 days. I had some body work done by a friend of mine, the stretch wizard, Ryan. He was very skilled, or he is very skilled, and he was very focused on helping me loosen up a little bit. Apparently, I have a lot of mobility issues, and the concluding statement was, your strength is your weakness. This isn't new to me. He's very insightful, but of course, I've had a lot of body work in my life. I've gone through a lot of different modalities to try to overcome some of those weaknesses, that being my strength, and subsequently, a relatively inflexible body. Okay. Cool. Well, that's neither here nor there about the whole topic necessarily, but we're going to get into some detail about some insights that I got during this session. Now, he has a very unique approach to his body work. Now, he's not simply a massage therapist or a stretch expert, and he isn't just about movement and other basic ways of treating the human body. He creates a very unique experience in his session. And it began with, for me at least, the things that were brought to my attention were the sounds that were put forth during this session. It wasn't music, music was spoken word that really got the mind into a state, and it was a contemplative state. And I think this is important, and this is something that I like to do with my own endeavors, with my meditation course, for example, and my guided meditations and this podcast. I want to put forth ideas and perspectives in such a way that stimulates your own mind, your own discovery, your own inquiry. Now, he was playing this. It was great. It set the stage. And I laid down, of course, face down on this massage table, and he began his work. Now, I wouldn't say anything stood out as particularly exceptional or special. I'm not going to say it wasn't exceptional skill. I'm just going to say it wasn't something that I hadn't experienced in some other iteration or another. Massage, there was some cupping, there was some stretching. He did it masterfully, and he combined all these very well. I've had each of those individually, and the combination of all was remarkable. But my point is that it was the way it was all brought together with the sound, with the ambiance, with the setting, and likely, and he didn't say much, the intention. Okay, so he brought out some thoughts, we'll say. Now, what I mean by that is he set the stage and he set the environment, the set and setting, and put me in a place where I had the opportunity to self-discover. Now, this is something that I advocate or teach or like to present or put forth myself with my meditation practice. And that is to provide the set and setting and the tools for your discovery, your own internal inquiry. And that's what occurred. So as I dove into my own thoughts while I'm being worked on, I had some insights. And these came together a little bit afterward, and then, of course, in subsequent days. Now, I'm highlighting this for a reason, and one is this. Transformative experiences happen all the time if you look for them, or if you put yourself in position to experience them. For example, psychedelics, which I talk about regularly on here, often quite transformative in that experience. My experience with Burning Man was transformative. When I go into my meditations with full intention and do all the things that I set aside as my own prescription, oftentimes transformative. I've had many breathwork sessions with practitioners that are highly skilled that resulted in a transformative experience. Oftentimes, if you go through a very physical exertion, that can be transformative, similar to the misogi. I don't know how to say that. Misogi. There are so many things that are transformative, and seeking them out and putting yourself in those positions can be highly beneficial. So this was one of those. It was a transformative experience. I knew it was going to be, and I went into it open, and it occurred. So I had some really powerful insights into my own human experience. And I want to share a couple of those, or one of them in particular. So the title of this podcast, Your Body is a Record, or The Body is a Record. As a physician, I think I have a pretty decent background to speak on this. And it's something that has been challenging for me as a practitioner or a provider of medical care for the career that I've put out there. I've been a physician since 2007 when I graduated medical school. So we're 15 years into this journey. And over this time, I've had a lot of frustration. And I've shared that a little bit on this podcast in other episodes. And I want to get into it a little more depth today because I think I've come to a more solid conclusion. And I mean, it's never going to conclude, so it's not actually a conclusion, but a conclusion to this 15-year period. And this is my conclusion at this point, and I'll have more as I explore and learn and experience more things over time. So the conclusion is this, to this point. The body is a record of your life. Now that's perhaps obvious in some ways. And going back to that initial cliche that I shared, and that is that your trauma is stored in the body. Now, this is what I want to get into. Let me first start with that. Trauma stored in the body. What does that mean practically? Are there little trauma gremlins hiding in your muscles? Do they live in your stomach or your bones, and then they just cause havoc? Do they poke you here and there? Do they tear apart? Do they gremlin around and destroy your tissues? What do they do? Do they cause you pain and suffering and depression or tension? What do they do? Well, they don't do anything because they don't exist. That's silly, first of all. There's no such thing as a trauma gremlin living within your body. So what is it? What is the trauma that lives in your body or is stored in your body? And what does that mean, stored? Is there a pocket somewhere where the trauma lives? Is there a passageway or a tunnel that it runs up and down? Like, what does it mean to have trauma stored in your body? And is trauma a thing? What is trauma? Well, let's get practical here. Trauma is an event. Trauma is an experience, more specifically. Something happened that you interpreted as traumatic. Maybe not in the moment, but later, you thereafter interpret it as traumatic. There's a thing happened, and then there's what you made it mean. Now, that doesn't mean that you're at fault. I'm not trying to point this out in a way that says you did this. It's all in your head. Let's get into that. So something happened and you made it mean something traumatic. I use this example. I'm going to give you an example. I use this example all the time to explain how perception can influence physiology. So you're walking through the woods and you hear a branch creak or crack, and immediately your mind flashes images or reaction or imagination, whatever you want to call it, of something dangerous, a bear, a wolf, a mountain lion. And immediately your heart starts racing. You go into fight or flight. Your muscles tense up. You're ready to run. You're ready to fight, whatever it takes. And immediately your entire body responds to perceived threat. The thing that happened was crick, crack, or whatever in the woods. You're ready, physiologically ready for the perceived threat. And then a little rabbit, bounds across the trail and disappears, and you calm. Now, there wasn't an actual threat, and you had a physiologic or physical reaction to perceived threat. Now imagine you're walking down the same path. 15 minutes later, you've calmed down, you're completely relaxed, and you walk right past a sleeping bear behind the bush. And the bear rustles awake and it sees you. And it, in its mind, contemplates, is this a meal worth the effort or the energy? And it goes back to sleep for whatever reason. You were in real danger and you did not perceive it. And you remained calm. You had no physiologic reaction to the real threat, whereas earlier you had a dramatic physiologic reaction to a perceived threat. Now, I use this example to illustrate one thing, and that is that what happened and what you made it mean can be wildly different. You can be in real danger and not perceive it and have no reaction, no stored trauma. Or you could have a stored trauma to something that was not traumatic or not dangerous, we'll say. It may have been traumatic in your creation or experience. Now, of course, perhaps the bear jumps out and chases you, and that's a real threat, perceived and physiologically reacted to. Awesome. Now you can see that those three scenarios have three different reactions. Okay. So trauma, and I want to use that because that's relatively mild. There are things that occur in life that have emotional, extreme intensity to them. Abuse situations, accidents, combat, you name it. There are things that occur that are perceived so threatening and maybe experienced threat, whereas you actually physically go through trauma that gets stored in the body. And let's talk about stored in the body. Now, in my meditation course, I go into detail on how the mind works. I go into detail on how memories are stored in the brain as a three-dimensional, essentially a hologram. You have all the neurons in your brain receiving the input from your senses: visual, taste, hearing, smell, feel. All these things go in and they're creating a three-dimensional memory. They go into multiple areas. The synapses create essentially a three-dimensional image, and not just an image, but a sensory experience where it's smell, sound, all the things that you had experienced. It's like you actually experience it again when you relive that memory. So perhaps trauma stored in the body could be explained neurologically as a holographic experience that is now projected within your mind anytime you recall it or bring it back up. Now that's the mind, that's the brain. What about the body? Well, let's go into that. So when you have a memory, a holographic experience that is recalled, you essentially can re-experience it through your mind. Now, how do we explain this physiologically or experientially? Now, go back to the sound in the woods and the physiologic reaction where perceived danger occurred and you have a heart rate, a muscle tension, Your digestive tract has blood shunted out of it. All of these actions occur. Now, in an imaginative moment, in a meditative moment, you can actually go and re-experience things and bring up all those senses again, which flood the body with chemicals which trigger autonomic responses. Okay. So what happens when you have a stressful reaction repeatedly? Let's go into exercise, for example. Let's just use that as a very benign example of a physiologic experience or a stimulus. Now, let's say you're a runner and you run 10 miles a day for 3 months. So like 900 miles. So that pursuit physically will have an impact on your physiology, your tissues. You may have blisters turn into calluses on your feet. You may lose toenails. You may have increased muscle density in the foot and lower legs. You may have increased oxygen carrying capacity, an increased VO2, we'll say. You may have decreased body weight in the form of decreased body fat stores. And you may have an overuse injury, we'll say, one of your knees, one of the tendons rubs differently, and you continue to push through that, and some of the tissues broke down. So now you have a physiologic adaptation to a trauma, we'll call it a physical experience, a stimulus that you lived over and over and over these 3 months, these 90 days, 10 miles every single day, pounding the pavement. You are breaking red blood cells every time your feet hit the ground and the muscles contract. There's so many things that occur in physical activity. Okay, so a physiologic record is being kept. And that is all those things that I just described at the body's changes over those 3 months. Perhaps you got a stress fracture in your foot. Well, that stress fracture, unattended to, may heal over time, and it's going to heal in the way that bones heal when not left to rest. There may be some increased density in certain areas. It may have a slight bend in it. Who knows? The point of that is that you will have a modification to the skeletal structure over time, and that is now a record of an occurrence. Now, the trauma response. When you have a memory of a traumatic experience, your body goes into a tension, into a fight or flight state, because you're experiencing it again and you're in a perceived danger, similar to the sound in the woods that didn't actually have a detached danger. So you may have lived through a real danger, but then you experience it over and over and over in a perceived danger state, but it still has the same physiologic reaction or impact. Okay, so you have a physiologic, or the physical body continues to experience this over and over and over. Over time, there will be permanent, or at least semi-permanent, maybe long-acting transient effects on the body. And habits will be formed, and positions of posture will be adopted. And over time, body movement patterns will be acquired that set up the way your body is. Perhaps you'll have this increased stress, and now you have an increased level of cortisol. Well, cortisol, stress hormone, increases carbohydrate craving. So maybe you overeat, and now you've gained weight. And maybe in the overeating, you're eating too many carbohydrates that turn into elevated blood glucose or blood sugar. And now you have diabetes. And now with the diabetes, you have a microvascular change that turns into peripheral neuropathy. And now you don't sleep well. And now that you don't sleep well, you don't have the same tissue turnover that allows healing. And now you have more chronic issues. You have arthritis develop. And I can go on and on physiologically of all the things that occur when your body reacts to a trauma or a perceived threat that is lived over and over. And then you get into patterns, and then you have triggers. And those triggers, innocuous as they may be, result in perceived threat, reaction, fight or flight. And fight or flight is like flooding your body with jet fuel and then not taking off. Well, perhaps the jet fuel is corrosive to the pipes or to the tubes or to the gears. So, trauma stored in the body. Okay, I can see it from that perspective. Now, I will say this, and I don't want to diminish anybody's experience. I really don't. I think that those type of things are real and they do have a physiologic effect on the body. But let's not focus too heavily on that alone, in that there are also other things stored in the body. All those times you went to the gym and had a great time with your partner. All the times you went to jiu-jitsu class and rolled with your buddies. All of the times that you hugged your children or held them in your arm a certain way gets stored in the body. Every beautiful meal you shared with your family, stored in the body. Every early morning where you got up to meditate and relaxed and set your mind on your goals and your dreams, stored in the body. Every time you went on a walk in nature and marveled at the beauty and flooded your body with endorphins, dopamine, stored in the body. So you are not simply a vessel to store trauma because that's all that's spoken, but you are the vessel that is a record of your entire life. Every activity, every choice, everything you've ever done is stored in the body. Now that's beautiful when seen in the big picture. You no longer are a victim of that trauma and carrying around the trauma as though that's the only thing in you. You're all of it. Yes, you are carrying around the reaction or the reflection of the trauma. But the love and the joy and the pleasure and the struggle and the striving, the accomplishment, everything you've ever done is stored in the body. Now, let's take that forward. Okay, so you are carrying around, or you are a result of everything that you've ever done. You are a record of your entire life. I see this often in my clinic. Right now, I work in 2 different clinics, and I run my own clinic in addition to the 2 that I work with as an employee. And I see the end of the road. And I talked about this in my last podcast, The Beautiful Death. I see the end of life. I see the elderly. I've seen thousands and thousands of people in their later years. I've seen many bodies in their later years. And I've seen the stories that they hold. I've seen the records of those lives lived. And I will tell you this, the vast majority of them have not done well physically. And there are outliers. There are many outliers. And when I explore the record physically, when I do a physical exam, I see the stories. But when I also speak with them and I hear the lifestyle, when I hear the choices, when I hear the perspectives and the attitudes, they coincide. It's beautiful to see. It's like a marvelous thing. Most people have not chosen patterns that serve them. And many have. And the question is, those of you listening to this, my demographic, I'll tell you this. This is who I target. It's me. It's the 35 to 45, maybe 50, that age range, predominantly male. That's who I want to talk to. And I want to say this. You're in the time of life of discovery. This is the great awakening in your life. This is the tipping point. You've just exited the time of life where you wouldn't listen anyway, where you're too young to take advice, where you're too exploratory, where you're too mobile and too easy living. And that's beautiful. Do that. That's part of development. But when you hit these ages, this middle age, it's the middle of your life. If you live to 100, you're going to be 50. If you live to 70, you're 35. So in that age range, you're in the middle. What you've done to this point is mostly reversible. It really is. If you've lived that hard life where you've neglected your physicality, where you've eaten poorly, where you've had bad habits, perhaps you've had traumas, you can reverse almost all of it. And you can take the turn to the more beautiful, the more intentional, the more robust and capable path, the life, the old person that's thriving. Or you can continue on and you can go down, and you can go down hard. I've seen the hard, and it is not pleasant. But once you hit those later years, 60s and 70s, you can't reverse it. I'm sorry. You can't. If you've done pretty well, yeah, you can make some adjustments and continue to do well. But if you haven't, it's over. And I'm just going to say that flatly. There may be 1 in a million that can turn it around in those later years and squeak out a great existence for the remaining 10 or 15. 1 in a million. And I'll tell you why. Habits, perspectives, mindset, structure of social culture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the whole package that goes with you. When you've hit those later years, it is the way it is. And challenge me on this all you want. If you point to examples, I guarantee you it's 1 in a million. That's my made up statistic, but it's pretty close. But 35, oh, you can make changes. You are still flexible. You are still capable of really changing the way you go. If you're 45, same thing. 50, you've got time. As it gets older, you're going to be more and more down the other path. But let's just talk to this age group I want to talk to. The record of your body is being laid down. How do you want it to go? If you're a man, optimize your hormones. Get in the gym. Lead your family. Do what it takes to get your house in order. If you're a female, do the same. Turn it around. It's not too late by any means. Don't give up. Don't settle into I'm a mom and I've had 3 kids or whatever. Change. You've got it in you. Find your people, get together, commit together, and go. There's so many of us. This is the era. That's like I'm saying. This is the great awakening. Now is the time to lay down the remaining record of your life. And it's awesome. It's so possible. All right, so let me go back to this. You lay down some traumas. Maybe you're a little fixated on that. Maybe you've made some poor choices and you're overweight. Maybe you're dealing with injuries that have just been there for decades. What do you do? There's a lot you can do. And I will guarantee you it starts with the mind. I guarantee you it starts with mindset. You can force yourself into the gym. You can force yourself into diets. You can force yourself into, sleep patterns and nutritional things. And I can promise you, unless those things are accompanied by a certain level of discipline and other things that are not obvious but are definitely mindset shifts, it won't stay. Unless, like I said, it's connected to the mindset shifts. If you don't see yourself as possibly changing, if you don't see yourself as free to be, free to see, free to do, it can't stay. It won't stay and it won't stick. All these people that go through these programs, they force themselves into these diets and exercise programs, and they'll read the memes or whatever. They'll get on the social media. If they don't do the deep work to get inside of who they are and see their record and see that they have the opportunity to rewrite their story, it won't stick. So that's where I go to work with my meditation program, which honestly, here's the truth. I'm going to say this here on this podcast. I'm shifting it. I've called it a meditation program for too long. It's not. It's just not a meditation program. It's a mind game. Meditation is a component. It's like 15%. That's just the truth. I've been calling it meditation for too long. It's not a meditation program. It is a mind shift. It's a mind game. And it's a game because it's fun and there are pieces and there are rules and there's a way to play in order to get control of your mind, to escape the drift, to escape that automatic program that's not working for you. First, the mind game. And then we get into the body, and the body follows right along. Once your mind is set, your body's like, all right, here we go. You're the leader. This is beautiful. So rewrite your record. That's the call to action today. Look at the record. Do the work. Well, how do I do the work? Find somebody that's done the work. Ask them, how do I do the work? And they may fumble around and say, well, I did this, and this. We'll do all of that. You've got time. Like if you spent a year exploring, you're going to get it. Wake up. This is the time for you to wake up. See what's possible. See what you're capable of. It's so beautiful. Okay. The body is a record of your life. Physically a record of every experience, habit, perception, feeling, thought that you've ever had. Everything that you've ever done was preceded by thought. In addition to a number of things that were out of your control, of course, that's circumstance. Fine. If you can't control it, you didn't control it, it happened. But you can control what you do with it, how you deal with it, how you be with it. So, I have nothing more to say about this now, but we're going to say a lot more soon. The body is a record. What you've written and what you will write. This is the Escape the Drift podcast, and I am Dr. Jacob Egbert.